Hi everybody, this is Kim Cleveland and I'm honored to be with you again. For those of you who do not know me, I am the secretary for the American Association of Nurse Attorneys. I have a private solo practice of law offices of Kimberly Cleveland in Canal Fulton, and I am also an educator and teach health policy and health law and health economics at Kent State University, where I teach undergraduate students, master's level students, and Doctor of Nursing Practice students. And my co-presenter for this poster is Dr. Vanderhorst, who is an associate professor in the College of Sociology at Kent State University. And so today we are providing you with the education about something that I learned about in my PhD program, and it was the focus of my dissertation. And I wanted to share it with you because at this conference we are talking about many policy issues, and one of the things that I think is really important for us to always keep in the back of our mind is how are we doing with building the pipeline of diverse nurses, and how are we doing with setting up educational practices that help to retain those nurses instead of just getting them admitted into a nursing program. And we know there's a lot of things that keep students in the programs that they come into, but one of the things that we have the ability to impact as educators is the cost of textbooks and the cost of education. Since so many of us at TANA find ourselves teaching law or policy or both within a nursing curriculum, I thought it was important to be able to bring this information to you for consideration when you're doing your part to select textbooks and weigh in on the curriculum. So I hope that when we're done discussing things today, that you're going to be able to identify characteristics of open education resources that contribute to retaining students. I hope that you'll be able to identify the importance of the ethical use and review and contribution of those resources and the provision of policy courses in particular, because that's where my research came from in my dissertation, but I believe that these would be applicable to law as well. And then also to have you identify the challenges to students and to educators in selecting open education resources for course support for policy. So first you're probably thinking, what the heck is an open education resource? Well, that is a resource that is put together and utilized by educators that is totally free to students. And this education is offered through a special license where the license is open, and in some cases the materials can be attributed, well, in all cases they're attributed to the authors, but in other situations those materials can also be modified and used. And we could make a whole 2-hour presentation on all the different publishing pieces that would include and what the rights are under there. But that's not really the purpose here. For our purposes today, you just want to know that from the student's perspective, these are free. And you're going to hear me talk about commercial digital textbooks. These are textbooks that are available to students to be purchased online. The big issue that came out with these open education resources was that every time that they were looked at in curriculum, the big idea that students loved was the fact that they were free. And that's really important in nursing, because if you think about it, cost of textbooks is one of the reasons that students find their education unaffordable, and one of the major contributions to students leaving the nursing program before they get a degree. So that's important to us because we know that before the pandemic we had a shortfall of nurses of 9 million. And there are some estimates today that after the pandemic, by 2030, we're going to have an 18 million global nurse shortfall by the year 2030. That's a big shortfall across the globe. We also know from the work that Lofton did in 2012, and it's been talked about again since then, as late as 2021, that 85% of the underrepresented nursing students are leaving nursing school before graduation. That's a lot of students. We also know that nursing diversity has not kept pace with the communities that are being served. And that's very recent data that's been reaffirmed through the data. So when we're looking at that global nursing shortfall, and we're looking at the fact that we need more nurses due to the aging of society, what we know is that we have to keep our nurses in the program so that they graduate and become nurses and are able to practice, and then hopefully go on to become nurse attorneys. So textbooks are one way we can impact that, by decreasing the cost of education. There was one nursing study that actually looked at nursing textbooks, and it was interesting to see that in that study they compared a hard published book, so one of those books that you hold in your hand, which aren't so popular anymore, with an online open education resource. But that author, Elf and her colleagues, found that there were no studies in nursing that compared the use of a commercial textbook that was available online to an open resource within the same class. And that's really important because many times students were being asked just to say generally whether they liked the book or not. But here we actually found in nursing, as we often do, we peeled back the onion and we found out that while students were ranking their textbooks as quality textbooks, we never asked them to rank two textbooks side by side in the same class. And so that was important to me, and that's actually what I decided to do in my dissertation. We also learned that there were very few studies that looked at cognitive load, and those two concepts came together and asked me an interesting question. If we're looking at textbooks side by side, and we're looking at how we're navigating them, is there one textbook that's harder to use than the other, such that maybe the student may not be transferring knowledge and retaining knowledge and taking it into long-term memory the way that they needed to? And finally, we found out that there were no studies that compared the impact of open textbooks versus commercial textbooks overall. And by impact, I mean the ability to retain that information. So when you look at all of that, it was kind of ripe to say we had this little gap in the literature that maybe we could learn something about that would help us to impact students in nursing a little bit better. So what I chose to do was a mixed methods convergence study, and I used a non-probabilistic sample of 173 students out of one large Midwestern university. The methodology that I used was a combination of open and closed-ended questions contained within one survey. The survey was voluntary to students, and they were able to get a small number of points for choosing to complete the survey, as opposed to if they had to complete the routine assignment in the class, which would have been to produce a one-paragraph discussion board on the material in the class that week. And this was delivered to a group of students who were all online, and they were asynchronous, meaning that they could access the class and participate at any time. The instruments that I chose to use to measure the usability and the quality from the student's perspective was the TOS score that carried a highly reliable Chromebox Alpha. I also used a modified LePink measure to measure the cognitive load, and that also carried a high reliability score with a Chromebox Alpha of 0.86. When I looked at the cognitive load and the usability measured for the books, I measured them with the students through the surveys, both for the digital textbooks and for the open education textbooks. I analyzed the data using a MANOVA, and found that there were no significant main effects in textbook usability. So students liked both textbooks equally, and they predicted they would use them based on all the characteristics that were contained in that study or in that instrument. There were also no significant main effects in cognitive load. So both of those textbooks, according to the statistics, carried the same level of difficulty in terms of use, and that provided us with a good identification that students pretty much were getting through these textbooks with the same amount of effort when reading. However, we did find a significant interaction effect when we looked at race and the number of previous civics classes that were analyzed. And because we only had a small percentage of underrepresented students within this class, it was very difficult to really extrapolate about what that meant. And so that data is going to need to be parsed out a little bit more so that we can understand what the impact of having more civics classes are, particularly in an underrepresented group of students. And I think that's going to be a particularly interesting thing to look at, because we really feel that that may go back to how students are experiencing the high school experience, particularly, excuse me, in this time, looking at how they experienced the high school experience during COVID, because they would have been seniors and juniors during that first year of COVID. So in mixed methods, we do the quantitative and the qualitative, and since this was convergent, we did them both at the same time in the survey. But here what the students wrote in their open-ended questions was that they did experience confusion while they were studying with these textbooks. And many of the comments reflected that the confusion was directly related to the navigation of the textbook and the ability to take notes or make notes within a digital environment. When I looked at the quantitative data with the qualitative data so that those findings could be integrated, what I found was that cognitive load and textbook usability were ubiquitous between the textbooks, and that students did not have a preference for either one, but used both and felt that both assisted them in completing their assignments, studying for quizzes, and being able to be prepared for class. So I think you can see that the overall benefit in education for the textbooks, number one, is the fact that it reduces cost, and that helps to keep students in their classes. But it also provides them with a quality textbook that they can take with them throughout their education and help to build their resource library, because once you are signed into an open educational textbook, you are able to use that textbook for as long as you have the address to sign into it. So that's another benefit, is how long you can keep it. Students also identified that the portability of the textbook was helpful, and that the multimedia materials that accompanied the textbooks that were open were also very helpful, because they helped to illustrate the facts that the students were studying and getting to learn about and discussing with their colleagues. There are some challenges to open education textbooks, and essentially that has a lot to do with faculty familiarity, and also to the ability of authors and faculty to contribute and develop these resources for students. I want to point out that another challenge that really has me interested, and I know we've got to have an answer for this coming in the future, is the confusion that occurs with navigation of the digital texts, whether that's open or whether that's affordable commercial digital text. We need to work on that and to find some ways for students to be able to engage in a more meaningful manner with the navigation of their book. And then finally, I think we have to also give consideration to the fact that when we are assigning resources that are online, we need to assure that we're giving the students the guidance as to how to use that textbook in the easiest way possible, and also how to extract the information from that textbook so that it's retrievable and able to be used and studied when the student wants to go back and review facts without having to reread the entire book that was provided. In terms of implications for practice from my study and from the review of the open education textbooks, I think that it's important for us to know that this is the time for us to develop retention strategies. And while affordability is part of this, helping students to study and be able to grow, retain, and to access information that they've learned is very, very important. And so we really need to make sure that we're accomplishing that. We also need to assure that the students are involved in the selection of their textbooks so that they can feel as if they are able to impact their learning environment. I think integrating the student perceptions into the undergraduate experience, particularly in this post-COVID higher learning education environment, is going to be a very important part to keeping student satisfaction high while helping students to become the best nurses that they can be and helping them to graduate so that they are able to practice. I hope that you found this helpful. In the event that you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or a question. I'd love to discuss my study or to discuss the concept of how you can integrate open education resources into your courses when you're teaching nursing students. I hope you enjoy the conference.